One of the big issues in a rural society has been the dealing with diseases, and particularly skin diseases. We all know of the reputation that leprosy has in third world countries. It's a disease that is not understood, is contagious, and very debilitating. And God had made the promise to the children of Israel that they would not suffer the diseases of Egypt. That is, that they would not be debilitated by all the different kinds of diseases that occurred, and particularly skin diseases. And the way that God delivered on that was by providing particular instructions given in the book of Leviticus as to how they were to respond when they discovered a scab or a sore or a bright spot, that they were to go to the priest to examine it. Chapter 13 deals with this issue, and while it's a long chapter, it's instructive for us to read it and to understand God's provision for dealing with these things, that we might learn how that we should respond, not just to ignore problems that occur in our health, but to deal with them, to have them examined. Leviticus chapter 13. The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, when a man has on the skin of his body a swelling, a scab, or a bright spot, and it becomes on the skin of his body like a leprous sore, then he shall be brought to Aaron the priest, or to one of his sons, the priests. The priest shall examine the sore on the skin of the body, and if the hair of the sore has turned white, and the sore appears to be deeper than the skin of his body, it is a leprous sore. Then the priest shall examine him and pronounce him unclean. But if the bright spot is white on the skin of his body and does not appear to be deeper than the skin, and its hair has not turned white, then the priest shall isolate the one who has the sore 7 days. And the priest shall examine him on the 7th day, and indeed, if the sore appears to be as it was, and the sore has not spread on the skin, then the priest shall isolate him another 7 days. Then the priest shall examine him again on the 7th day. And indeed, if the sore has faded, and the sore has not spread on the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him clean. It is only a scab, and he shall wash his clothes and be clean. But if the scab should at all spread over the skin, after he has been seen by the priest for his cleansing, he shall be seen by the priest again. And if the priest sees that the scab has indeed spread on the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is leprosy. When the leprous sore is on the person, then he shall be brought to the priest, and the priest shall examine him. And indeed, if the swelling on the skin is white, and it has turned the hair white, and there is a spot of raw flesh in the swelling, it is an old leprosy on the skin of his body. The priest shall pronounce him unclean, and shall not isolate him, for he is unclean. And if leprosy breaks out all over the skin, and the leprosy covers all the skin of the one who has the sore, from his head to his foot, wherever the priest looks, then the priest shall consider, and indeed, if the leprosy has covered all his body, he shall pronounce him clean who has the sore. It has all turned white. He is clean. But when the raw flesh appears on him, he shall be unclean. And the priest shall examine the raw flesh and pronounce him to be unclean, for the raw flesh is unclean. It is leprosy. Or if the raw flesh changes and turns white again, he shall come to the priest, and the priest shall examine him, and indeed if the sore has turned white, then the priest shall pronounce him clean who has the sore. He is clean. If the body develops a boil in the skin, and it is healed, and in the place of the boil there comes a white swelling, or a bright spot reddish white, then it shall be shown to the priest. And if when the priest sees it, it indeed appears deeper than the skin, and its hair has turned white, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a leprous sore which has broken out on the boil. But if the priest examines it, and indeed there are no white hairs in it, and it is no deeper than the skin, but has faded, then the priest shall isolate him 7 days. And if it should be all spread over the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a leprous sore. But if the bright spot stays in one place and has not spread, it is the scar of the boil, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. Or if the body receives a burn on its skin by fire, and the raw flesh of the burn becomes a bright spot, reddish white or white, then the priest shall examine it, and indeed if the hair of the bright spot has turned white, and it appears deeper than the skin, it is leprosy broken out in the burn. Therefore the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a leprous sore. But if the priest examines it, and indeed there are no white hairs in the bright spot, and it is not deeper than the skin, but has faded, then the priest shall isolate him 7 days, and the priest shall examine him on the 7th day, and if it has at all spread over the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a leprous sore. But if the bright spot stays in one place and has not spread on the skin, but has faded, it is a swelling from the burn. The priest shall pronounce him clean, for it is the scar from the burn. If a man or a woman has a sore on the head or the beard, then the priest shall examine the sore, and indeed if it appears deeper than the skin, and there is in it thin yellow hair, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a scaly leprosy of the head or beard. But if the priest examines the scaly sore, and indeed it does not appear deeper than the skin, and there is no black hair in it, then the priest shall isolate the one who has the scale 7 days. And on the 7th day the priest shall examine the sore, and indeed if the scale has not spread, and there is no yellow hair in it, and the scale does not appear deeper than the skin, he shall shave himself, but the scale he shall not shave, and the priest shall isolate the one who has the scale another 7 days. On the 7th day the priest shall examine the scale, and indeed if the scale has not spread over the skin, and does not appear deeper than the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him clean. He shall wash his clothes and be clean. But if the scale should at all spread over the skin after his cleansing, then the priest shall examine him, and indeed if the scale has spread over the skin, the priest need not seek for yellow hair, he is unclean. But if the scale appears to be at a standstill, and there is black hair grown up in it, the scale has healed, he is clean, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. My name's Arthur, and I thank you for joining me as we read verses 1 to 37 of Leviticus 13. There is considerably more in this chapter, but let's just review what we've seen. We've seen first of all that the priest has a particular role, not offering sacrifices, but examining, the role that we would give today to the doctor. He is the expert. He is the one who is familiar with the various forms of sores that people can have on the skin, and by the experience and the training and the instructions given here, he is able to make a judgment as to whether a particular sore that a person has is infectious, is just a scar, whether the person needs to be isolated. There is a process by which we have quarantining of people who may be infectious until the judgment is made, and when the judgment is made, then procedures are in place for how the person who is infected shall live. In this way, we don't have widespread spreading of skin diseases among the people, and great care is taken to recognise and to deal with the cases that are found. And distinction needs to be made between injuries that become infected, and infections that are temporary, and infections that are permanent. And we need to follow the same principles today. The whole point of clean living, though, is to minimize these skin diseases. When Jesus healed the lepers in the New Testament, his first command to them was to go show yourself to the priests. The priests were the ones who had to declare the leper clear of his leprosy.